Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
Elena, I'm laughing because we just had a conversation that probably could have been 30 minutes of podcast content and came up with like 17 ideas for the next 17 episodes. So stay tuned, people. We are certainly not running out.
Absolutely. This recording block is about twice as long as we expected it to be because there's always so much for us to chat about. So yeah, I think it was good brainstorming and maybe we'll feed some of this episode too. So we're going to roll with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that actually rolls right into the insights we are going to cover that we did write down. We're seeing a lot of things in our athletes right now that are sort of similar. I don't know if you have this experience where it's like all the athletes are experiencing this or all the athletes are experiencing that. And something I wanted to call out is that a ton of athletes right now are sick, which is a bummer, or have been sick at some point early in the winter. And it's tough. I mean, we're all inside. We're all sort of like up against each other. And I think we know like respiratory stuff tends to go around a lot in the winter. So I just wanted to start with providing a little bit of a framework for thinking about what to do if you think you're getting sick or if you are sick from a training perspective. Something that I find is that usually, similarly with injury, it's better to just take the rest, front load it, and go easy earlier than like sort of half-ass your recovery until you're ground to a halt by not being able to move. So one way to think about this, an athlete put it really well recently in her training log. She said, I'm going to do less to do more later. And again, like really leaning in hard to, I'm just going to kind of be in bed. I'm going to hydrate a lot. I'm going to get my electrolytes. I'm going to fuel well. Usually that's the fastest way to getting back to normal. So again, like you could have 2 weeks worth of just kind of not great training days, or maybe you have 3 days where you just don't move at all and then you feel totally fine after that. A couple things too, there's like some red flags that I think about with definitely don't train. If you have something like a fever, it's a really good reason to not be training. If you have any of like chest stuff, it's like really hard to breathe, wheezing, all of that, I probably wouldn't push through. And then some cues that people use are like, if it's above the neck, you're kind of okay. Maybe it's just congestion, but if it's below the neck, body aches, etc., I wouldn't do that. So everyone take care of yourselves out there. We hope that we're like kind of moving through this and it's going to get better moving forward. But yeah, it just feels like everybody's sick.
I know. I've been seeing the same thing. And it was true for myself. I mean, I got sick over the new year. I feel like everyone got sick around the holidays or just after because it's been spreading. And I feel like I still have a cough. So I have another framework that's maybe helpful, but more playful on that is that everyone knows I love the sauna. So you can think of the sauna as your workout and you're just getting it all out of your system. But that can be your only workout.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That was your best gear pick of the week ever, was like the sauna tent situation. And I'm so curious if any of our listeners actually acted on that. But if you're sick, could be a nice splurge so that you can get better a little faster.
Yeah, absolutely. So love it. Okay. What else are you seeing, Katie?
Yeah. Okay. So something else I've been seeing is I'm sort of forming this thought. You'll see in my outline, there's the word maybe because I was thinking it through, but I'm going to go for it. I have some broad thoughts on the idea of trusting the process. And this is something I am certainly guilty of and that I see a lot in athletes is that when you have a bad workout, it's really, really hard to trust the process, or just when you're not feeling great and say like, okay, this is still kind of working towards my goals. Like I was supposed to do something at race pace and it just really didn't happen. How do I know that this is actually going to work out? And I think one of the reasons that it's really hard is because there's a lot of uncontrollables anytime that you're working towards a goal. And it feels when you have one of those bad workouts that you just can't really control what's going on. And therefore just saying like, all right, I'm trusting this process, it's going to be fine, is something that's actually really scary to do. So whenever I have a bad workout or whenever I have an athlete that has a bad workout, something I like to think about a lot that we've talked about on the podcast before is really thinking about the rule of thirds. So if you're doing something at the right intensity, a third of your workouts are probably going to feel kind of bad, a third are going to feel great, and a third are going to feel somewhere in the middle. So anytime you finish that workout and you're just like, oh my gosh, that absolutely sucks, just saying, you know what? That's just going in the bad bucket. And that's okay. That's just the way that this is. And this actually probably means I'm pretty dialed. Again, we've talked about how if you have bad workout after bad workout after bad workout, it probably means there's something else going on under the surface. But one-offs like that are really nothing to be super, super worried about. And as a coach, I can say the process actually usually always does work. If you're just laying those foundations, you can trust it. You can trust your coach, but want to validate that it's really hard when the workouts make it harder to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And yeah, I have to remind myself of that more often. I mean, I had this week, I feel like I'm more in the bad bucket. And I also recognize that that's because I've been really busy and did a couple of big things. And that will make me stronger later as long as I don't overdo it, right? So then it's going to be, focus on fueling a lot, focus on a little bit more rest this week, not doing the extra thing. To that point of like maybe tying this together with the sickness thing is like do less to do more later when that's the right place. And also recognize that some of those are just going to be like bad days. And that's totally okay because it's getting you to the right place. So
Yeah. And I like to, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes I feel like if I have a really bad workout, it actually means that there's a really good workout around the corner. You just can't
Yeah.
see it yet. So I'm sure we've had the experience of like, okay, you go out for like a long run or something and it's a disaster long run, but then your next one is like so much easier, even though it's longer or something like that. I've seen that happen with athletes a couple of times recently. So just keep faith that it's going to be okay and there will be good ones and there will be bad ones, but it still sucks. I don't know. Like bad workouts can shake your confidence so
Oh my
much.
gosh, yeah. I was talking to a friend about that who, I mean, she had a bad race, but she's like, I've learned like because these kinds of races for her, it's a marathon, but she's a trail runner. She's like, because these kinds of races just are not like my main focus. If I go out and have a bad marathon, I don't want that to destroy my confidence for the rest of the season when I don't need that to happen. I'm like, okay, that's like something that you're deciding for yourself, and I totally get that because it does suck. But I think also if you've gone through the process long enough, you will realize that you've had these days where you have like really shitty workouts, or like I remember I got really sick last year and when I had the parasite, I felt horrible for like weeks. Like I was still training, feeling horrible for like a couple weeks, but lightly. And then one day I just felt absolutely amazing. And I was like, I'm never going to forget this feeling. I'm never going to forget this feeling because this workout feels infinitely better because I just struggled through 2 weeks of having bad workouts and it all came together. And that kind of keeps me going. I think, yeah, it's part of the belief, which we know is so important as athletes. So
That's so interesting that you said that too. Just I'm thinking now this translates right into my next insight. The idea that during that time, right, you have bad workout after bad workout after bad workout, your body's actually doing something that's pretty disconnected from what your mind's doing, which is your mind is just saying like, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks, this is bad. But I don't know that your body, like it was really thinking about it in the exact same way. Instead, your body's actually making these adaptations that you are going to realize a little bit down the line. And this relates to my next insight because I've been thinking a lot about the concept of embodiment recently and like the idea of being in your body and what that even means. And I think the way that I've heard it described before is that like most of us live most of our days in our heads and not in our bodies. And being in your body is saying like, okay, I'm sitting here, like what actually are the sensations in my body? It's sort of a tenet of meditation too, to think about like, okay, I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel the chair is supporting me. I can feel my heart beating, all of that. And it's interesting in sport because we've talked about how sports can be sort of a form of spirituality. We can link that episode where we riffed on that broad idea. But I think in general, endurance is a sport where any type of movement, we're really forced to be in our bodies. And I'm curious if that's kind of one of the reasons why we find it to be such a meditative place, because you are forced to be like kind of scanning and understanding what's going on physiologically. And then moving to a place where you can actually just like witness that and not totally judge it as you would in a workout that feels bad is like, wow, my legs feel like trash and this is going really, really poorly. But more just like, wow, there's like a heaviness there today. Like, that's interesting. I'm curious about it. I think there's something to that reframe. Again, I'm not great at it. I'm certainly not going to say that I have figured all of this woo-woo spirituality stuff out. But I want to kind of put this out there as something to be thinking about is this idea of embodiment and knowing that endurance can be a gateway to get there, which I think has some important cascading effects on like better mental health and just better self-awareness.
Yeah. I really love, I mean, I feel like that could be like the topic of our entire episode if we like, what is embodiment and how does endurance affect that? I've always kind of felt that though. Like, I think people say like as athletes, we just tend to be that much more in tune with our bodies because you are feeling how it feels day in and day out. And I think there was something there you said that was interesting where it's like, yeah, I don't feel like I'm always good at that. But I think the difference is sometimes when I feel good at it, it's because I can be curious about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, to me, like it makes sense that my body's heavy and tired this week. Like I just did a giant ski weekend, or I am purposely like building mileage and volume right now. So it's meant to feel a little bit tired and hard and that kind of thing. But sometimes when I'm not good at it, it's because I can't find a reason for my body like not feeling right. And I'm like, what is the reason? What is the reason? And maybe it's like that transition of like, okay, well, you don't always have to know the reason. It's just like being aware of it. And what does that mean? And I really like that you kind of framed that a little bit. I hadn't thought about that in a bit. So yeah, very important part of being an athlete.
Yeah, and it's interesting because again, like it's your mind talking when it's like, what is the reason? What is the reason? But I think we all have to have an appreciation for the fact that our bodies are just doing a lot to kind of make us better and to keep us at homeostasis and to help us out that we don't fully understand and we're never going to fully understand and that we can't entirely control. Like maybe that's also part that's a little bit scary is like the body just does these things that are all probably in the spirit of self-healing that we cannot control. We can't say like, okay, let's say like you have a broken bone. You can't be like, like fix race faster. Like I want you to be faster. And yet the body has this incredible like tendency to kind of heal itself and move forward. So I don't know. I agree with you. This could be a whole episode. And I will say this previews like a lot of the research that I do from more of like an academic perspective has to do with sort of the mindsets we hold about our bodies. And it's the reason why I've been thinking so much about self-healing and embodiment and all these other woo-woo things that actually are grounded in research. But yeah, maybe a challenge to the listeners is just like try to be in your body a little bit more, not just when you're moving or even when you're moving. If you feel like your mind's wandering and you're not actually kind of feeling those steps on your run or feeling those strokes in the water, whatever that is, try to just tap into it. And I think you'll find better technique, better performance, just a lot of better things if you can be in your body.
Absolutely, yeah. And that reminds me that that'll be one of the 17 episodes that we brainstormed recently. Will be Katie sharing her research.
I know. I'm very, very excited for that moment. There's some good parallels for sure. Yeah, Elena was actually interviewed for one of my qualitative interviews for this research project. I digress, but it was awesome. She absolutely crushed it. So worlds really collided there.
I really enjoyed that. That was super, super cool. So yeah, okay. Well, I love those thoughts. Those are really good to think about.
All right, your turn. What has been new? You've been on the East Coast. Let's talk about that.
Okay, yeah, I have been on the East Coast. I did kind of a rogue thing actually recently. So that's kind of like the basis of all of my insights right now. Of course, I agree with Katie. I've had a lot of athletes who are sick, but I think that's like a general good way of thinking about it. Because I am recovering from my own saga of not feeling amazing, one of my goals this year has been to do things that feel fun and exciting, that get me excited about the like training and community and all of that. And I had an opportunity arise that was just like, that checks all the boxes. And it happened to be in Vermont. And so I pulled the trigger and flew to Vermont to go to the Craftsbury ski marathons with some of my Craftsbury Green Racing Project teammates who are all awesome, most of whom are cross-country skiers, some of whom are not. So I was in the not really a cross-country skier category, like as in don't have any traditional training or experience, but have picked it up in very recreational ways recently and enjoy doing it. So this was my opportunity to do like a race event in cross-country skiing with some friends and just kind of make a fun weekend out of it. And it was really cool. And I had the best time ever. It definitely brought up a lot of thoughts and reflections on just like the value of being a total beginner and trying something new. And in my case, I felt like I was really immersed into like Nordic ski racing culture, which is always funny to be like, oh, this is the world of people who take this really seriously versus I'm used to the ultra world where people take this really seriously. Or like, I know, Katie, the triathlon world when you show up to Ironman, like, what does this feel like? It was just like a really cool experience to kind of pick out some of the pieces. Some are familiar and some are different. And I think some reflections on this. Firstly, just the emotions of doing something new. I think it was like riding the whole wave of like, okay, I am not as nervous about going and doing the race from a competing standpoint. Like I have literally no expectations on myself for performing well. I know I will be nowhere near the front of the pack. I'm just really hoping I'm not last, but like even if I was last, that would make perfect sense. However, once I got into it, of course, I was feeling that like natural competitive drive, right? And I was like, I want to be a little bit better at this. And I want to like figure out how I can push a little bit. But then I get like, there's parts of me that was feeling a little bit even jealous sometimes of the people that were good at it. Cause I'm like, oh, dang, I want to be there. And then it's like, it's just so interesting, maybe just like talking about Katie's embodiment, sitting with like how my body was feeling versus how my brain was feeling. Like my body was feeling like it was working hard and like it was enjoying trying this challenge apart from the fact that it was a race. My mind at times was kind of like frustrated that I wasn't as good as everyone else. And I was playing that role back and forth. And honestly, just being aware in that process, in hindsight, found to be a really enjoyable experience, which maybe sounds weird, mainly because I was just really practicing the awareness and trying something new. So that was like one big reflection.
Wait, I'm going to jump in on that because that's so funny. I relate to that at a very high level with whenever my family plays pickleball. I'm so bad at pickleball, but I'm also the most competitive person in the world. And I get really frustrated because I'm like, I'm supposed to be good at stuff. Like I just win stuff. This is how it works. And then I like absolutely suck at pickleball and can't get it over the net. So I just totally get it. Like my body is like, this is kind of cool. We're outside. It's like zone one and some agility. And my brain's like, no.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I relate to this so much. And I think a lot of our audience is pretty competitive people. They found this sport. But I love that note right there. And I'm not going to stop you because you have so many more good insights on this.
No, I love that. I say it because I think it is a more universal experience of really having all the intentions. Like, I think I went in there, like, just very happy, very positive, like, really having a good time, just still noticing part of myself that's competitive. And that's not a bad thing. I just, like, it was really cool to feel that in a different context. And I think another big part of this for me is, like I mentioned, I had those goals around just doing things that were exciting to me and really leaning in on community. And I'm really glad that I did this because I love the people I was spending time with. And there's something really special, I think, of having people that understand both the value of the competitive nature that of which we're pursuing these high goals at, from my perspective, from a running level. However, they also really just are goofy and enjoy being outside and make it really fun. And like no one was taking themselves too seriously, despite some of them being absolute crushers. Like my teammate won the whole thing because she's a beast. So I was just reminded of how important that is. And to anyone who's kind of feeling maybe some of the intensity, if it's coming from your community, maybe it's thinking about expanding that in different ways to like have a few other different types of communities that you can engage with. Or if you're feeling really isolated, maybe just get a group of friends together to go do a random adventure because it's a blast. So that was something that was really important for me to feel this past weekend. Okay, and then one last thing I want to say from a coaching perspective, which is more related to what I've seen with athletes in addition to what I experienced myself this weekend. I've been talking to a lot of athletes, like I mentioned on the last episode, about cross training. And many people have been like, well, should I be thinking about how should I be thinking about zones and cross training? Like most of the time, I'm usually having cross training be like an easy zone 2 thing. But people are like, well, I kind of want to be like higher in my zone. And I was feeling this from a cross country racing or ski racing perspective where I was like, wow, my heart rate's not really that high, but I don't really want to go any faster. When it comes to cross training, I think heart rate zones can be a little bit challenging for a couple of reasons. One, while ideally I think your zones should be the same across the board, they're not for different sports, often because you haven't fully developed the muscular strength or the technique or the familiarity or just the mental flow of doing those sports. So for me, like with cross country skiing, my friends who are cross country skiers can probably rip their they know their zone 3 and they're like crushing it at that level because they know what they're doing. If I were skiing in what is my running zone 3, I would be dying because my muscles aren't like there for it. Like I feel like I'm just out of whack and it's just way harder for me. So like for me, my upper zone 2 is probably like the effort level, the feel of my zone 3. So this is where like going by feel, I still think is really, really important. Tuning into like how long do I think I could be doing this for? Does this feel sustainable, etc. But don't worry too much about the different heart rate things. There's a tendency to like compare like, oh, well, I'm not going as hard on the bike because my heart rate's low. It's like, no, it just means that you maybe haven't biked as much and you're not as comfortable with that. So go by feel, especially if it's a cross training thing. I think that's the best way to do it until you're adapting to that sport.
Yeah, it's interesting just to point on zones here and like going by feel in general. I feel like one of my evolutions as a coach in the last year or so has been so much more of cues to go by feel, even for people who it's their primary sport, just because I think if you've been in sport for long enough, you have a pretty good sense of like, okay, is this actually easy? For brand new athletes, no, we're going to use some numbers because no one knows what anything means at all. But in general, I think when you're trying new sports or regular sports, try to really, really tap into like what's my easy gear, what's my moderate gear, and what's my hard gear, and then don't get too caught up in those specific numbers. Just like you were saying here, because if you were trying to be directly in line with those numbers, you probably would have had a really tough time, would have really had trouble bouncing back, and it would have not been so fun and community oriented as you were focused on those goals.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So yeah, just a note on that. And then the last thing is more of a personal reflection when I was like, maybe I'm actually getting older and I need to be thinking about my body a little bit differently because I definitely had some things that were a little abnormal for me. Like one of my arches got so sore from skate skiing. I mean, granted, I did skate ski like 20 miles off of not really doing a whole lot of skate skiing. And I don't think my boots are very good. They're like, I'm on Facebook Marketplace in Seattle like 5 years ago. But my whole like arch area just swelled up and was really sore and I could barely walk on it and it lasted for like the swelling is kind of still there. I just noticing that my body is not bouncing back quite as quick as it used to. And that means I actually have to really take care of it when things come up. Like I need to ice and I need to notice things and I maybe shouldn't just like always jump in and do something that's twice or 3 times as long as I've ever done on cross-country skis. I had a blast doing it. I don't know if I'm going to stop doing that, but I am maybe thinking about the balance of recovery here a little bit differently than I maybe used to like 3-4 years ago. But yeah, I hope I mean, I know there's all ages that are listening to this and everyone I talk to, like my parents and my aunt and uncle, they're always just like, well, it just starts now. It just is getting worse. I think Katie and I are both on the same page of we are lifelong athletes. We're always going to be doing our thing, but I might have to adapt a little bit over time.
That's so funny. I feel like there's some people here who are listening who are going to be like, come on, you're not even 30. Like, get over yourself. You have no idea how rough it is. And then other people are going to be like, oh, yeah, it's coming. Like, this is where it starts.
No, I know. I'm like, I'm here for all of those. Everyone can just give me their wrath of complaining about this at age whatever I am. Like, I'm not even 30 yet. But yeah, I'm noticing it. So I'm more just talking about embodiment. I'm just trying to pay attention to my body.
But yeah, that's the sub theme of this episode is embodiment. And I will say too, like, I know how much more recovery I need and how much less like nomadic Katie lifestyle where I sleep in a different bed every single night and do 6 planes every week. Like, that is over for sure. I'm like, I sort of need to be in bed at 9 o'clock. So as long as we take care of ourselves, I think we can be lifelong athletes. But that maintenance just takes more and more and more time. And it's a time is time. You know, at the end of the day, we spend a lot of time training, and the maintenance is, yeah, to make this vehicle run. It's going to take a lot more trips to the shop and time, probably horizontal.
Yeah, totally. And the last thing is maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it in one of our topics later on, is just that I am still so on the run post ski train for like volume training and getting running stimulus on tired legs. That'll, I think, always be a big piece of my training, but I definitely did that a little bit this weekend after skiing, and I just really enjoy it. I know that some people like think it's like the worst thing ever to think about running after skiing, and I totally get that. Or maybe you run before skiing, but just the double stimulus, but low intensity, I think goes a long way for me having some adaptations, at least for time on feet and endurance and like the strength in my legs for keeping up running on higher mileage days. So yeah, I did that and I was proud to start that process again.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's honestly the best segue I could think of too. This is sort of like a grab bag episode, I would say, but some of our main content today is to talk about sort of how we would integrate skiing with endurance training, and then just maybe some broader reflections on varying your training styles based on the event that you're training for. Elena, I think you are the expert in this, but I also have some skiing coming up in my season later on, and I'm thinking about how I want to balance these. So why don't you get us started with just maybe your high level reflections on integrating different sports depending on your goals?
Yeah, definitely. So, no surprise to anyone, I love skiing. I live in Utah and I really enjoy training. And so, I want to make sure I'm hitting my goals while still doing the things that I like doing, which is skiing. So, how I think about it is there's different kinds of goals where I think across the board, there's some consistent things that will always be valuable. I think we can all agree on the fact that easy volume, like the 80-20 approach, for the most part, is really valuable. So we get a lot of easy volume, but we still mix in some speed work and some threshold work to keep building our aerobic engines and get that muscular stimulus for speed and getting some strength for durability for your body. I think those are like some foundational pillars that are like really important to any training plan regardless. But then I start thinking that for different events, there's different things to optimize for, that of which training can look a little bit maybe atypical than like the basic training plan. And for me as an endurance runner, and I think this would apply to like really any ultra endurance events. So I'm thinking like half Ironman or definitely Ironman. Like those are long events. You are out there for, multiple hours. And that's where I think there's this variable that is less concrete and less measurable, which is just this time on feet endurance. How long can your body just be going and feeling relatively stable? And there's a few things that I think skiing does for me that kind of go along with my goals from a running perspective. One, I think that gives me that time on feet. I mean, when you're out on ski adventures, you're pretty much like, those days, when you go skiing, you're probably like going from like 9 to at least lunch. Some people, it's great when you can do a couple hours, but I feel like ski days are on vacation in particular are typically like you're trying to hit it. So you're skiing all day long. So you're on your feet for a while. And then you get a little bit of, it doesn't have to be a big stimulus, but kind of like your off the bike runs. Like it's just a little bit more on your body. In addition to that, from a running perspective, especially like a downhill running perspective, the power stimulus and the strength and the lateral movement that comes in skiing is just a different stimulus to your body that I also think adds durability for running downhill. And even if it's not running as your goal, just having versatility for durability, I think is really important no matter what. So I enjoy it for those two main reasons. And there's maybe different type, like I do all the different types of skiing. So I like downhill skiing, obviously, but I do a lot of backcountry, which has an uphill component to it, which I think is really, really great for me for running uphill. So for anyone who's interested in that or is doing kind of their own uphill travel, there's a large argument for that as well. But it's just like different ways of integrating exciting, fun things that also are actually serving a purpose depending on what your goals are.
Yeah, I mean, I think this speaks too to this idea. We talk a lot about what is the intention of the workout. And I think often the intention of the workout is like, okay, we're building the aerobic base. There is so many different ways to do that that aren't as specific as like, well, it has to be running if your goal is a run race. And similarly, if you're trying to build durability, like just go outside for a long time and move your body. And that's a great way to do it. So I think when you're thinking about kind of practically how to integrate stuff like this, it helps to have a conversation with your coach or just with yourself about like, okay, what is the intention of this day, of this workout, of this week, of this cycle, like of this whole training plan? And then that can help you figure out where it's okay to swap. Let me ask you, Elena, where do you think it's like not necessarily okay to swap? Because of course you can't just ski your way to doing a marathon or an ultra run or running, a half Ironman or something like that. So how do we figure out like what that threshold is?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So, a couple things I'll say on that. The first is you're really going, for me with skiing, it's like serving a purpose as those extra stimulus, long days on your feet kinds of days. So, it's for me easy volume. I would not replace my long run with it, and I would not replace my speed workouts with it. It's like your cross training approach in general. Like on the days that are not your big hitters for your workouts, so in my mind, speed or your long run stimulus, it's okay to put skiing in there. For some athletes, if you're feeling like you can handle it and you are comfortable with it, I'm okay with people doing their long run as the first block and then doing some skiing, but making sure that the extra skiing is really light, because then you have a big stack stimulus day. Like I already got my long run out of the way, then I can do some long blocks, some skiing, and that will kind of serve that like big block energy of the day. But yeah, I don't do it to replace those things. So that's definitely, I would say, don't replace those long runs and speed days with it. And the other thought I have on that is people often ask, okay, do you want me to run after skiing or before skiing, or does it matter? And to that end, I don't think it really matters if you ski before or after running. Maybe there's just some things to consider on it. If you're skiing after running, it's more just like you get more time on your feet, and that's good, and you kind of like already got your run workout of the day. And if it's like easy volume, I'm pretty much okay with that almost ever, because you did the running thing first. But if you're running after your ski, that should only be easy. Like I do not want that to be any speed in that. Maybe some strides, sure, but like no speed workout, and like it doesn't have to be all that long. Like please don't go for your long run after skiing, mainly because that's a harder stimulus on your legs. And where I think it's really beneficial is that you can get that stimulus of running steady on tired legs. But I typically don't want athletes to do anything hard after that, because it's just like you're already in a tired, fatigued state. So more at risk for injury in that case.
Yeah, and I'd say too, probably you're also a little bit dehydrated and potentially your fueling might not be perfect after having skied for the entire day. So that's another thing to be thinking about a lot, is just if you're going to go out for that run, like if it's short, you probably can't do that much damage in 30 to 45 minutes or something, but you might be like a lot more dehydrated and just worn down from being outside than you think, especially because it's really hard to stay super hydrated if you're at altitude and you're skiing and it's sunny, and like where are you going to carry the water? So make the intention to like try to prioritize that anytime you go inside. But if you're ripping, it's a little bit harder to do that.
Totally. That's a really, really good point. And I was talking about that with teammates actually this past weekend too, because I think there's a common tendency, and we talked about this before, you don't maybe fuel the way that you would fuel your workouts or your core training when you're skiing, because it doesn't feel like your core training. So also practicing that too, of like, if I'm going to be doing this, I actually need to fuel really well throughout this activity, because it's affecting my training in its holistic sense. So I think people, even like my teammates were talking about this because they like didn't fuel anything while they were skiing, because they're just like, well, I didn't really think about it. And that's very fair, but it's just like a challenge with when you're thinking about this in training, because when we're talking about it in this context, that is part of your training, because it's just another stimulus. And of course you're active and you should fuel your work no matter what you're doing. So good point.
And I think too, the way that you're talking about this, we could probably expand this out to really any other sports that you want to work in. Maybe your thing is not skiing, but it's something else that would sort of fill a similar purpose, any type of like endurance-y type event. Maybe the way to think about it is keep your big rocks in the week for your primary event. If that's a run, it's probably going to be your speed workout and your long run. If it's a big bike, you probably have a long ride and you have some type of speed session on the bike. Again, triathlon's a little bit trickier, but usually with triathlon, we're working like, all right, this is a run-focused week or this is a bike-focused week. And I would say often, because we do so much base 80-20, no more than 20% of your week is going to be those big rocks. So there is a lot of space to kind of flex things more than you think. And so if you're trying to map this onto other sports, just ask yourself, what are the A sessions? What are the big rocks? Protect them. And then anything else, it's just gravy and it's endurance, and you'll probably be in pretty good shape.
And also, if you're traveling to ski, like just ski, live it up. I say this because I get to do it all the time, but like enjoy your vacations if you're going skiing, because I think that's really cool. It's such a cool sport.
That's awesome. Okay, well, now we're going to do like a total pivot. Again, this is a grab bag episode on various topics. And it is almost National Girls and Women in Sports Day, or I think it actually was yesterday based on when this is going to air. I'm not exactly sure. It's coming out really, really soon. And last year, we did actually, us kicking off being podcast co hosts together was National Girls and Women in Sports Day, where we did a 5-episode series all about these really interesting female athlete topics. It was one of our best attempts at crowdsourcing ever. We heard from so many amazing people. So I would direct anyone to that 5-episode series if you're new and you haven't listened to it. But we did want to kind of entertain some more female athlete topics, which I would say are still relevant to male listeners. So don't go anywhere if you're still here right now from hearing about skiing. But we're going to frame this as a bunch of great listener and athlete questions that we've gotten related to female athletes. And I thought maybe we could just sort of open riff on the questions that we've gotten recently.
I love that. Let's bring it back. It's kind of crowdsourcing without us really intending to. We've just been doing this long enough that we just keep getting these questions. So yeah, we're back at it.
All right. So first question. I get this question all the time as a coach, and it's also a question that gets a ton of hype in different social media circles because people have very, very different opinions on it. But the question is, should you try to sync your training with your cycle, for example, so that you're going to train easier in some times, maybe in some phases of your cycle, and harder in other times? Elena, what's your initial reaction to that question?
I have also seen this question plenty of times. I personally don't sync my training to my cycle, mainly because I don't really feel like I am impacted that adversely one way or another. But when I coach people who are very clear about what their body feels like and needs, then I absolutely do, which is like, I think that's the very personal approach to it. But it takes knowing your body really well. So I wouldn't say just because you've seen some rules or read some things, I should change my training based on what I've seen on the internet. That I'm kind of anti. What I am really pro is understanding your cycle and understanding how you feel with your cycle, and then adapting training based on what your knowledge for your own body is. Because I have some people who feel amazing on their period but feel horrible the week before, and I also have it be vice versa, where people just feel absolutely horrible when they're actually on their period but like don't really notice it otherwise. So yeah, I think it's very personal, but it's really by feel. I don't know, Katie, I'm curious because you probably have more expertise on this in particular.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty in line with you. I would say one of the reasons that I don't recommend like really, really intentional syncing training with cycles is that if you're racing, we cannot control where your cycle is going to be on race day. And so if we have never, ever done a hard session when you're on like day 25 of your cycle, and then your race is on day 25 of your cycle, I don't want you to believe that you can't do it just because we've created this idea that you're not going to be able to do it. So what I usually do is I have athletes kind of just use the regular calendar of our training and we kind of see where they fall on race day. But what I do say is, to your point about kind of understanding your body, it's really, really important to manage your expectations. So you might just know, hey, like on this day, whether it's day 2 or day 25 or day 14, I tend to feel a little bit lower energy. I don't seem to recover as fast. I don't sleep as well. And it's like, yeah, well, then you can be a little bit more gentle with yourself, either going into a race or going into any hard training session, because you know that you're just not going to feel exactly right. And this also speaks to the real huge importance of tracking your cycle and just sort of the empowerment that comes from understanding your body a little bit better. So the ways that you can do that is like, I tell athletes like, yeah, throw it in your training log if you think something cycle related is impacting how you feel. Just like you would say, hey, like my heel is hurting a little bit. It's like, yeah, I felt really low energy and this is where I am. And then we can often identify patterns. And similarly too, if someone's really not feeling good for a couple of days in a row, maybe the first question that I will ask a female athlete is, okay, like where are you in your cycle? And I'm not going to say that's the only reason why there's like a million reasons why you might not feel good. But I think start by understanding it and then give yourself grace if you know that it impacts you a lot. And I will say too, if you feel like your cycle is something that is really, really hard to manage, you feel terrible, like it knocks you out for 3 or 4 days, that's also something to get checked out. Like go talk to a doctor, go talk to either an OBGYN, or there's like a lot of kind of more Eastern medicine approaches that can kind of help people figure out how to better balance hormones. But in general, cycles aren't supposed to be like so debilitating that you can't move for 3 days and you can't do anything. So I would just use that as a cue to get checked out if you feel like it's impacting your training so much that you're not really able to do much.
I think that's all great. I do really like the perspective of like, well, you can't change it on your race. So it's really learning how to work with your body no matter what the circumstances are, because yeah, it's knowing your body, but then also working with your body the right way. Cool. Okay. Katie, what are some of the pros and cons of different contraception choices for athletes?
Oh, this is a question we get a lot too. And I'm like, I feel like I've had to learn about so many of these topics, both because I'm curious about it generally and because athletes ask about them. So, again, like anytime we do a topic like this, we have to give the caveat that we are not doctors and you should definitely talk to your doctor about what the best choices for you are. But some information that is out there, and I think I wrote a blog post on this a while ago that I can link. A couple things to think about are that there's some evidence that different types of oral hormonal birth control can leave a little bit of performance potential on the table just because it's kind of pumping your body full of hormones that can have a little bit more adverse consequences. I believe there's some stat out there that it's like it leaves 8 to 11% of performance potential on the table. Again, I am not going to quote those exact studies. A lot of this is coming from like Stacey Sims. She has some good stuff on this that I've read, and I link in the article. But it's just something to be aware of, that there could be an influence of at least that choice on how you're feeling in training. That being said, if that's what you use right now and you feel great, don't change it. Like, it's fine. It's whatever works for you. I would say hormonal IUDs are very common in a lot of endurance athletes just because generally the hormones are at least supposed to be a little bit more localized and not systemic. And so some people prefer that. I think the evidence is actually mixed on whether they are truly localized or not. A lot of people do have more systemic effects. But what's nice about that type of option is you put it in, you don't really have to think about it again. And if you have like really, really heavy or difficult to deal with periods, often that can make your period go away, which is good and bad. It's bad in the sense that then you can't track your cycle and know exactly where you are. And again, we've talked about how cycles can be useful for understanding if you're in a state of energy balance or not. Just like we talked about a couple weeks ago, like your period can be the first thing to go if you're in a state of energy imbalance and not eating enough. So that's why I'm always just like, if there's an athlete who's really, really worried about low energy availability, maybe has a history of disordered eating, I'm like, yeah, I probably wouldn't choose an option that's going to take away that one important health signal. But there's a useful post that we can link from the Huzzah Hub, which is a favorite resource of ours on ways to kind of keep tabs on energy availability if you are on hormone birth control. So we can link that. And then a couple other ones. There's like a copper IUD is nice because there's no hormones attached and you can track your cycle normally. However, a lot of people think it leads to heavier periods. So that's just something to be aware of. And then there's like patches and implants and all the other things that are out there as well. Definitely worth looking into those, although they're a lot less common. So all this is to say, the best option for you is the option that feels right and kind of fits the criteria that you're looking for. But just think carefully about all those different pros and cons, because there can be impacts on either what you know about your body, how you feel while you're taking it, or again, if you get pregnant, that's going to have a pretty big impact on your training as well too. So you need to make sure it sort of serves what your goals are.
Wow, Katie, you crushed that. I will actually add only one thing, which is there's also the natural cycles approach with an Oura ring attached, or I mean, you can do it with a thermometer. I just can't imagine myself actually taking my temperature every day and having that be accurate. So you have an Oura ring and it takes your skin temperature, and then it's kind of telling you based on your temperature, it's tracking your cycle and also giving an idea of like when you're fertile, when you're not fertile. It is really interesting. I think it's obviously not like formal contraception in the sense that you are protected in any real meaningful way. However, from a standpoint of really understanding your body and understanding your cycle, and therefore knowing when or not you have to use protection, I think that is pretty useful. And I know some athletes who have switched to that, and I personally have actually switched to that too, temporarily, as I figure out some like energy balance and body awareness things. So that can be a really useful tool if you are trying to just go like, I just need to know my body for a little bit and then figure out what I want to do from there.
Yeah, and I would say too, like even if you're not really looking for a contraception option for whatever reason at this time, natural cycles and an Oura ring is a great way to start understanding your body. If you want to know how does my body temperature change as a function of where I am in my cycle, and I want to know how to predict my period, usually to the day, predict ovulation, I just think that's all really cool information. I'm always about like more information. That's why we might get, for example, labs and blood work, because it's like, oh, it's good to know that your ferritin's low or your vitamin D is low or whatever, and it's good to know that I'm ovulating right now, and that's how I feel in training or in life generally. So I just find any data like that really empowering. Again, for some people, data is just overwhelming, and I wouldn't push people to get more if they don't feel like they need it. But if you're curious, I think it's useful from like a science perspective and a body empowerment perspective, in addition to the contraception focus.
Yep, ditto. I agree with that.
Sweet. All right. Next question. How should you think about endurance training if you're trying to get pregnant? And we are going to link our episode recently with Hannah Prenti, which was awesome. She talked about her journey with starting a family. She's amazing. We'll definitely have her back soon. But is there anything, Elena, that you think about if an athlete asks you a question like this?
I think only a couple things would really come to mind. I'm not an expert at this because one, I haven't gone through it myself yet, and I more just speak from the knowledge I have on female athletes and what we just talked about with cycle management and energy balance. If an athlete is really trying to get pregnant and they're not having their period, I think hopefully I would have already known that from working with them that they weren't having their period, and we would be already trying to address that because again, that is typically a sign of energy imbalance, and I don't want that to be the state of like normalcy for my athletes at all. So then we'd be like, okay, we really need to work on this then for your health and your goals of having a family. And that's where we're really dialing into maybe we have to lower the training volume. I mean, Hannah spoke about this really eloquently, but potentially lowering training volume while we increase energy available, increase fueling. But really, I think from an athlete's perspective, like if they're feeling good and everything seems normal and they're excited about doing endurance training and they're also wanting to have a family, from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, go for it. Like there's nothing to change in my mind unless you're already noticing that there's some challenges with having your cycle that's going to prevent you from doing that, which I think Hannah spoke to so eloquently. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's too simplistic. But hey, yeah, do you think of anything else, Katie?
No, I think again, like we both haven't gone through this. And so I don't want to overstep. And I know that any conversations about fertility and pregnancy can be really, really fraught and challenging. I think maybe the broader point is probably it's good to figure out managing the stress on your body and trying to lower that as much as possible. So if for you, training is something that's not a huge stress on your body, it brings you joy, you love it, like, yeah, let's definitely do it. But would I say, like, all right, we are going super performance minded and our only goal is try to optimize for everything we can in performance context while your goal is to also get pregnant? That probably wouldn't be my approach as a coach. It would be more like, how do we integrate training in your life in a way that brings you joy and stress relief and is fun? I think too, just really, really dialing the fueling during that time. Obviously, you always want to be dialed, but being as dialed as possible, just because that supports a healthy, regular cycle. So just think about all the things that you would do if you wanted to make sure that your cycle was regular and healthy. And then kind of we can move from that. And hopefully it works out in the way that you want. And if not, there's a lot of resources that you can use. And some of those could be totally like not training related is the tricky thing. I think there's a lot of stigma out there around elite athletes and like, oh, that's not good for your body and whatever. If you're fueling the work, it's totally fine. It's great. It's not good for anyone's body to be training at an extremely high level and not fueling the work. But if you're fueling the work, we've seen so many incredible women do so many incredible things. So I really try to like divorce those two things and just say, like you were saying, it's only if there are energy imbalances to begin with that we might be changing the training volume. And it's more just like shifting goals because the goal here is something that's a little bit different than like peak performance at a race.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And that was something I was going to try to call out more explicitly. And I don't know if I'll word this perfectly, but maybe just, I think we're trying to move the sport. And I think the sport is already naturally moving this way, but we at least personally want to be like advocates for this of, you are going to perform your best when you are already at your healthiest. That doesn't matter whether you're really trying to get pregnant or not. Like if you're at your best, then you should be able to achieve whatever you want to achieve. And that's where your body's going to be in the best position to be. So we want to get you there anyways. So if everything's already looking good on the surface, then it's like, I really have nothing to change. But if things are, like we said, the fueling is not there to begin with, then I would want to correct that anyways, regardless of whether or not you are looking to have a child or not. So yeah, maybe just divorcing that there's different goals to balance necessarily if you're trying to be a parent or not.
Totally, yeah. And I think a related point that we maybe talked about a little bit when we talked to Hannah, and I do want to call out here too, is like having a regular cycle is important regardless of whether you're trying to get pregnant. That is so important from just an overall total body health perspective as an athlete. There's a lot of conversations about there, especially in the past, where it was like, oh, it's just super normal to lose your period because you're training at a high level. That is not normal at all. So that's why kind of I have those conversations with athletes a lot. So yeah, the pregnancy piece, maybe we say like balance your cycle, balance your hormones, and make sure that the fueling and training are in check to do that.
Absolutely. So actually I think this is a really nice segue into another topic that's kind of related to the fueling body image general sphere that we definitely hear a lot from all athletes, but specifically from female athletes. Katie, you had a really kind of more specific topic on this. Could you mind sharing what you had talked about with an athlete recently? And maybe we can talk about that a second.
Yeah, definitely. So I've had this question or a version of this question come up many, many times over the course of coaching. And it came up again recently. I was like, oh, this would be a great podcast topic. But basically something that I think a lot of athletes have noticed and are very sensitive to is different types of body comp changes over the course of a season, especially if they're really for the first time trying to ground in the idea of like, we have an off season, we have like a base season where maybe we're lifting more, we have a season where we're really trying to do high endurance, we have a race season, etc. And it is quite natural that in the course of a season like that, you are going to see some body comp changes. So for example, if you are lifting really, really heavy, like 4 times a week and you haven't been lifting before, yeah, you're probably going to put on muscle because that's what happens when you're lifting heavy and it's making you stronger and it's awesome. But your body might look a little different or feel a little different. Your clothes might fit a little bit differently. Similarly, in the off season, if you're not training at the level that you were before, your body might feel different than it did kind of at the peak of your season. And so we are absolutely never as coaches pushing any type of body type agenda. I think it's very natural that the body can just change as a result of the stimulus that you're giving it. So I often think about how I want to talk to athletes about these types of things. A lot of people, when they start to notice changes, are like, wait, I don't like this. Should I still be doing this type of training? I'm going to switch it up. And usually my answer is, first, let's think about what your goals are for the season, for performance in general. And let's say, for example, that you're lifting a lot and you feel like you're putting on muscle and you don't like how that looks. Well, is your goal to get stronger and perform later in the season? Then it's possible that, yeah, some body comp changes are going to go part and parcel with that. And so I always just push people to challenge a little bit, like, is my goal just about body comp or is it about performance? And most people say it's actually about performance. People that are in these circles that are signing up for races usually aren't driven just by body comp, even though it can be so loud based on everything that society says to us, especially women. So start again with like, what are your values? What is your purpose? What are your goals? And then when you start having those negative thoughts, I think can help to challenge them a little bit. And similarly, if in the off season, you're seeing some body comp changes, it's like, great, my body needs to recover right now. It's been put through a lot in this season and it has been on the line of like, how do I get enough fuel and how do I do this? And now it can finally just be a little bit more calm and okay. I often say like, this is setting me up so well for next season. So all this is to say, it's natural, it's normal, it's a really, really common question. But I think at the end of the day, when you really drill into it, there are very few people in our circles who are signing up to work with a coach and signing up for races who are just driven by like, this is a body comp thing. And if it is, I would challenge that too. And I would think about, are there other goals that we can ground in? Is this type of athlete that I want to be who is very, very much focused on this? Because at the end of the day, fitness is a feeling. We say that often. It's not a look. And I think it's super easy to get caught up in the idea that it is a look and get a little bit scared when we feel like that look is changing.
Yeah, I honestly perfect. I have really nothing to add to that. I think that was an incredible summary and I agree with that entirely. So yeah, next question.
Awesome. Oh, wow. I'm happy. This is great. Okay. Last question then. So again, thank you to everyone for bearing with us on the grab bag episode. We wanted to get into a topic that I think we will probably do a deeper dive on later in the podcast journey, but it is a question about fueling. And the question is, how do I know if I'm fueling enough? And how do we even know what enough means? Because I think we're always saying as athletes, you have to eat enough. We've even been saying that in this podcast right now, but it's really, really hard to drill into that. And if you're not, for example, working with a registered dietitian, I wouldn't say that every single athlete, no matter what, has to work with a registered dietitian. And yet I don't know that everybody knows exactly what it means to eat enough. So I don't know, maybe some high level thoughts to kick us off, and we can go back and forth on this a little bit, is using your health as an indicator of whether you're eating enough is a great place to start here. So things like immune system function, if you are getting sick all the time, over and over and over again, obviously many athletes are sick right now. That does not mean that you have a fueling issue necessarily. But if it's you get sick and you get better and you get sick again and again and again and again, I'm often asking, okay, what's going on here? Let's get some labs done and let's consider whether it's potentially a fueling thing because immune system's a lot weaker. If you're not recovering well, it could be a cue that you're not fueling well. So if you're just so sore and so tired and so depleted from workouts, often easy workouts, that's a good sign that something's a little bit off. We've talked about hormonal health before. Use your period as an indicator of whether you are in a state of energy balance or not. And the last thing here too with enoughness is if you're really in a not so good mental headspace, I often see a link between that and not eating enough, literally just not having enough carbs on board. So asking yourself hey, is this headspace normal for me? Obviously, there are so many other things that go into anxiety, depression, etc., mental health struggles, and it's not always going to be fueling. But I will say, if you're wondering if you're eating enough and you go through all those health indicator boxes and any of them seem a little bit off, start with trying to eat a little bit more. That's a great place to start and see if it does anything. And then we can kind of run down the list of other things. But sometimes it is just as simple, again, simple, not easy, but sometimes it's just as simple enough as like really, really upping the calories and the carbs, and you will start to feel a little bit better if you're not so sure about it.
Yeah, I think those are great starting points and indicators. I think maybe I'll hit on a different aspect of this that I've also seen, which is people maybe feeling when they're not sure if they're eating enough, but generally want to be eating enough, but then are also maintaining the fear of having too much because the idea of having too much has been so ingrained in many people, particularly athletes, when it comes to a body comp perspective and how to cope with that. I can speak to this from a little bit of a general framework, but then also some personal experience here. On the general framework side, when you're training, especially like some of the athletes that we coach for triathlons and for running, it's like you're working out 5-6 times a week and honestly multiple hours. First off, it's really, really, really hard to get enough, actually. I think a really good place to start is the energy availability calculator that we will again link to this episode. And while we don't advocate for counting calories all the time, I think it's horrible, but like even just 1 day or 2 days of normal workouts, getting a sense of how many carbs specifically you're having and your calories, but like seeing that in the calculator of how am I actually doing, I think you might be surprised at how much your body actually needs. So that's like one general thing to look at. And then also from a actual workout perspective, I think there's now so much evidence. It's coming from the cycling world, but it's been validated in studies. And now it's a big in the endurance world entirely is just fueling workouts consistently really, really well. And not just workouts as like easy runs, like anytime that you're out there, making sure you're taking in fuel on that. And I have noticed, and I've also talked about this with athletes, just when you finish that workout, not feeling like you need to lay on the floor for a few minutes, feeling like you can kind of just continue with your day. And then there's like not really this whole bonk effect that's happening. And maybe that feeling of feeling depleted after a workout is like what has become so used to you. Like that's how you know you did a good workout and how you know you exercise. But that maybe that feeling doesn't actually have to be the case. So to Katie's point, even just trying it, try fueling a little bit more for a week and see how you feel with it. The last indicator I was going to add to Katie's list was also just sleep. If you're having sleep disturbances, if you're ever waking up hungry, I think I know so many athletes who have had that. I experienced that many times. That's a sign that you're not eating enough, and the body just knows. Sometimes it takes a little bit to catch up, and that's why you wake up hungry in the middle of the night. I know that if I work out in the evening, I tend to not be able to eat enough before I go to sleep, and then I'll like almost certainly wake up in the middle of the night. So that's another indicator on that side. But I guess maybe to tie it all together, I can give a little brief summary of my experience with this, which has been like at this point, a multi-year journey. Quick context is that like Katie and I talked about this before. When I was in college, I had a brief stint of not eating enough and like very knowingly not eating enough. But since then, I've really recovered and was really trying to fuel my training consistently. However, I probably still carried with me some of the baggage of just not wanting to eat too much, but like wanting to eat enough to fuel my training. So I definitely relate with people who are like worried about that feeling of going over and what that feels like. Oh, do I really need a gel on this run? It's only like 4 miles. I would never take a gel on this run. Or like, man, I'm used to having oatmeal for my run, but 2 bowls of oatmeal, that feels excessive. Like that kind of thing. It's just like changing some of the baseline habits that your brain is used to. So as I kind of went through this journey, I realized that I was probably chronically undercarbing my work. And so recently, in the last several months, I've been like really, really intentional about having a lot more fuel on board. So I'm taking gels, multiple gels, honestly, on every run. I'm never doing anything underfueled. I'm having bread often. I'm making a lot of bread and I'm eating that. And I'm making sure that there's like a breakfast on board before I do anything, and then a big recovery snack, even if it's like snacking for a couple hours after a workout. So definitely that training time is really well fueled. I am feeling massively better, and I was already eating what I felt was a lot. I'm not finishing runs feeling like I need to lay on the floor, like I said. I'm sleeping a lot better. My attitude, my like mental health feels a lot better in many capacities, and this was all just like truly by just fueling a lot more on runs. And I've had so much fear of going over, and my body has changed. I'm not sure exactly how it's changed. I've gotten on the scale a couple of times and I weigh actually like significantly more than I did before. However, I actually feel better and stronger, and I've had to like check myself and be like, look, the scale doesn't actually matter. Like I'm feeling really good. And I never thought I like really cared even that much about it, but it was really interesting for me to recognize that there are still parts of me that was paying attention to that and checking that and recognizing that I was actually feeling a lot better with the fuel on board, despite from the scales perspective being heavier. And yeah, I just think that's like I'm learning this in tandem with a lot of this research coming out, but I really think there's something to it. So to Katie's point, just close it out. If in doubt, just try feeling more and see how you feel, because it's been really great for me.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. And I will say too that like if in doubt, just try more. I think a cue for me is often like if I'm questioning like, well, do I need a gel on this run? Just do it. Always just do it. Anytime you're questioning it, that's a cue to just do it, because it will almost always help. Like it is very, very rare that that won't help you. And if there's any like sort of fear or stigma around it, then just trying it and realizing how much better you feel is just amazing. You're like, whoa, I wasn't sure if about that, like taking that gel before my 4-mile easy run. And then I did, and it was the best 4-mile run I've done in the last 3 months. You're like, oh, well, maybe I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do it for the 4-mile run, the 3-mile run, the 6-mile run, whatever it is. So just try it again. That's like the biggest challenge is your body will start to also appreciate it and expect it and then perform better as a result, because it can trust that it's going to get the food that it needs. So the body is very smart. It is very mindful. Again, embodiment, it's like separate from the way that our physical minds work. And I think based on everything that we get from culture and from society and from ingrained habits, just like we were talking about, there is a lot in there that can push against that whole idea of enough. But yeah, our message is just try it, and hopefully it'll make you feel a little better and get some big goals this season with big fueling.
Absolutely. It's the fueling era. For me, again, it's 2025 is the year of bread.
I love that. It's the year of the bread. It's like the year of the snake and the year of the bread.
Year of the bread. Yeah, it's like there's that kind of saying of let's get this bread. And I don't know if you guys know like the ikigai concept. There's like this 4-circle Venn diagram. That's the Japanese idea of like finding your true purpose in life. And I have this meme mug that's like the ikigai on one side. It's like very serious and thoughtful. And the other side of it is like, let's get this bread. And mixing all the different categories of people who would be going after that, like bank robbers and ducks and things. And
that's awesome.
Doesn't make sense. Maybe we just need to include the image in this graphic of this podcast in the notes, because it's very funny.
I think we will. Yeah, check out our show notes for a grab bag. That's awesome. All right, well, this has been a fun grab bag. I love grab bags, just random topics. Hopefully they're helpful. If they're not, let us know. Let's close it out with a challenge of the week and a gear pick of the week. So my challenge of the week is if and when you are dreading your workout, you don't want to do it. Maybe it's like 1 degree in Boston. It's windy on the Charles again, and you don't want to be out there. Activate the reframe. I get to do this. And think about times in the past, maybe when you've been like injured and you just couldn't get out and you really, really wanted to. Just reminding yourself, I get to do this and it's such a privilege, I think can be a little bit helpful, because we all know that as much as you don't want to do this now, if you got injured tomorrow or you got sick tomorrow, you'd be like, wow, I really wish I could. So I think that's a helpful reframe for workouts that we don't want to do.
I love that. I have been doing that myself, so thank you.
And I think there's also a way to do it that's kind of sarcastic and hilarious, where it's like you can be running into that 50-mile-an-hour headwind in 1 degree and screaming, I get to do this, into the void. It's like it can make you laugh if you're having a tough time.
I know. I love it. Sometimes, honestly, adverse conditions wake me up more and make me happier because I just think about how ridiculous it is.
Yeah, you just scream like, I'm having fun. I'm having fun, when you're totally not having fun.
But that makes it fun. So then you are having fun. See? Exactly. It's self-fulfilling. Okay, mine is pretty simple, but it's just go 0.1 mile further than what you plan to, or whatever the equivalent is on the bike. Just like literally a little bit more. And it's not because I feel like we always have to do more, but because I think it just helps you realize that you're fine and you just do a little bit more, and it makes you just feel like that extra bit of like, oh yeah, I'm good. I got this. And it's just, yeah, just try it. It's a little mental thing. I think it will help you in many different ways of like racing and training.
I love that. I'm going to give the bike and the swim reframe. So swim, it's 100 more, not 0.1, because 0.1's like maybe kind of long, a little bit long on the swim. And on the bike, I feel like it's like half a mile or something is probably fair for that type of amount.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if it's maybe on the bike, you can just like I don't care. 0.2. It's just a little, people just stop like right on the dot sometimes. And I'm like, I totally get that. There are days where like, I am definitely stopping it right on the dot, but I'm trying to like have myself practice just like, yeah, just do 0.1 more. It just always makes me feel good. So
the world's going to see a lot of 7.1 mile runs from me coming up. That's like, I always like run 7 miles and I'm like, yep, I'm good. We're not doing any more, but 7.1.
Yeah. Or if I'm doing it out and back, I always go 0.1 further, because I know for sure that I will get it on the way back. I don't have to like worry about getting to my starting point and being like, oh no, I have to go 0.1 more.
This episode is all about little mind games we can play with ourselves to achieve goals.
Gamifying.
Yep. Okay, gear pick of the week. I can do this one first. So everyone knows I love Lululemon. I wear a lot of Lululemon. I wish I didn't love it so much, but I do. I'm that girl. And they have a really good wool long sleeve base layer that came out recently. So I've talked about the Swiftly Tech long sleeve shirt before that I use for running, but they made a wool version. So it's the Lululemon Swiftly wool shirt, long sleeve, and it's like a race length, I think, so it's a little bit shorter, but I've been wearing it as a base layer on all these really cold days, and it's great. And mine's purple, which is my favorite color. So cannot recommend Lululemon highly enough, but especially for this base layer.
Wow, amazing. I love that. Also love that Lululemon, I don't know if you saw this, apparently they like emailed everyone who lived in the areas affected by the LA fires like $100 or something like that. No questions asked, but just like, here, like buy something for us.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Cool. Okay, mine. So sadly, I was trying to find these pants. I have these Patagonia pants that I absolutely love. I use them for cross country skiing. They have side pockets and they're like a little bit thicker and insulated. And I truly can't find them anywhere. I wonder if they were discontinued. So I'm going to keep looking and hopefully we'll put the actual link for those specific pants on it. But I found a very similar pair that must be like their remodeled version is like the Terravia Alpine pant. And they just make, I mean, it's just nice to have like a pair of kind of thicker, but still like very mobile, like thicker than leggings, more intense than leggings, but still legging-esque because they have the pockets and they're like very movable kind of pant. So that's what these are. And I love them. So they're great for cross-country skiing. They're great for hiking, etc.
That's awesome. I do have a bone to pick with Patagonia because they are guilty of discontinuing their very best products. They have some stuff that's been so good. And like, I mean, Jim and I have talked extensively about the Capilene Air hoodie. Like I have one of those and it's a vintage item. And now I only bring it out in special occasions because it has gotten me through so many mountain adventures, so many cold runs. And there's just the one and they don't make them anymore. So yeah, Patagonia, if you're listening, please do better. We love your stuff. Just stop getting rid of it.
Yeah, please keep it all.
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff. All right. Well, this was awesome. We covered a lot. Thanks for doing this with me as always. And listeners, stay tuned for the 17 versions of episodes that are going to come from what we riffed on before we got online, but we somehow still came up with well over an hour of content. So yeah, as always, thanks so much for listening. Please share this if you know anyone who could benefit from it. Drop us a rating or review if you're new on wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks so much for listening.